Welcome to the Post Shift Podcast, your raw look at the hospitality industry, brought to you by SHC. What is happening, Post Shifters? Welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. It has been a number of months since I've done one of these. If you haven't been following along on social media and whatnot, starting a new job, splitting my time between Vancouver and Victoria, and then also we had 50 Best, which Ryan and I will definitely chat about going into this conversation. What is going on? Come on. There we go. Nope, it's not working. Let's figure that out later. But I'm really looking forward to coming back and actually talking to Mr. Lyan himself. I'm Ryan Chetiyawardana, and so I'm looking forward to this chat. I always look forward to chats when it comes to the people I have on the show. So welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Shawn. Very stoked to be able to catch up with you. We didn't get enough of time to be able to kind of talk in Vancouver, mainly for all the things you had on, but it was something I had very excited to be able to have in the diary to catch up over this.
So for everybody watching, can you give them the elevator pitch on how you got started in the industry and what got you to the point of being a bartender legend?
It's very sweet, but I think the abridged story is I fell into it from the kitchen side, and having loved the food world, being excited about being able to work in it in a practical sense, I kind of started in kitchens and then quickly found that I was missing all the engagement and that actual kind of like human side of interaction that I had kind of known from food in a kind of more less professional setting. So I switched the bars. And then I jumped around kind of, literally every type and facet of hospitality that I could. So nightclubs, dive bars, little cocktail bars, hotels, fine dining, and then kind of started to find the bits that I found kind of most interesting and looked at the bits that I knew I wanted to focus on and just trying to have a bit of a parallel towards what I kind of saw happening in the industry. So having worked for folks for a number of years, I started the Lyan side with my sisters and some family in 2012, and then we've kind of grown our side of trying to look at really everything that we can in food and drink as possible since those days. So it's still I still kind of count myself as a bartender, even though I don't really get a chance to be kind of behind the bars as much as I used to. But it's very much that idea of looking at bartending in a very wide sense of going, how do you use it as a tool to excite people and bring people together?
Does all your family still involved in the business even to this day?
Yeah, but I suppose it's in varying capacities because they were never hospitality. They kind of came at it from other sides, and they've still been amazing mentors, and even people who've been kind of like part of the journey. Ian, they now have Bar Snack in New York. Very much part of the family, was kind of instrumental as part of the kind of journey. Is no longer kind of working with us on Lyan projects, but is still very much kind of part of the kind of family, both in an extended kind of professional sense, but also very close to kind of me and my sisters as well. And then I suppose people who've been best friends and been actually part of the company for 10 plus years, they've now kind of grown into being kind of very much alongside as kind of business partners in the kind of business aspects of the company as well.
So what was the driving force behind White Lyan when you opened that 12 years ago now? And then the way you went about it with the no waste sort of thing. And this is pre-sustainability models and stuff like that. Like the sustainability thing is kind of everywhere and out of control a little bit to a degree. What was the driving force behind that initial focus point and direction?
Well, sustainability was definitely part of it, and we've been doing some kind of lectures trying to highlight the topic a couple of years prior to that, and going, we wanted to kind of honestly, the whole thing with White Lyan was to be able to kick off a discussion. It was a bit of a hold a mirror up to the industry and go, these things are great, these things are wonderful that we have, but what else should we be looking at? And there was a couple of fundamental parts I knew we wanted to be kind of, I suppose, central to Lyan in general, but we got to kind of highlight them in a very particular way with White Lyan in particular. And it was looking and kind of challenging the kind of established norms and going, how do we push this in a way that kind of shows our love for the industry, but demonstrates that there could be other things in the landscape of it? Because at that point in time, everything was quite traditional in the if it was a proper cocktail, you were chipping off blocks of ice, you were squeezing citrus a la minute, you had these kind of set of classic cocktail formulae. And I love all those things, and they have their absolute place. But it was to try and go, well, there are other ways of doing things,
Mm.
and let us kind of like go right back to the foundational aspects. And it sounds so weird to kind of talk about this in kind of like white line days of, or even in general, actually, it sounds very strange to say like we made our own water, and like we use that as like the actual foundation of going, well, let's control everything up from there. And not only can we kind of challenge the idea of what's right in the cocktail world to do that, but we can look at professionalism of our industry of going, do we need to throw things away? Do we need to have waste? Do we need to use the only same kind of acidulant sweeteners, bittering agents? Why can we look at a wider set of things? But also just the role of being a bartender. By taking away a back bar, by taking away, the time constraints, the financial aspects of what usually would be a barrier to the average guest coming into a bar. I mean, our drinks were cheap as hell, and we could serve them really quick. We were able to kind of like open up what cocktails could be to a wider set of people. And then as bartenders, we could just look after folks and go, this could be a really fun space. Doesn't have to be like, those kind of more old school bars that were very much sit down, dark, play jazz. Actually, they weren't dark. They were quite bright spaces. We were dark and moody, and we played like hip hop and disco, and we were, really trying to kind of like bring some of the fun that we'd seen in other like meeting places and go, well, cocktails are amazing. They should be for the every person. And why can't they fit in these kind of spaces? So it was kind of like looking at these facets of waste, of the role of being a bartender, and this kind of control and professionalism aspect. And, those were very much the idea of going, let's use this as a very extreme version of a bar to demonstrate how all of these conversations need to be part of what we're all looking at as an industry.
And back in 2013, how did the general consumer sort of take that? Were they aware of the level of back end prep, the level of R&D it took to get to that stage, or were they just happy to get a quick and cheap drink?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was the same with what we had with when we did those kind of sustainability lectures in 2011. Consumer reception to it was great, and there was definitely a bit of confusion, but people were willing to like hear and kind of enter into dialogue. And honestly, we didn't want to be like, oh, we spend all of these hours doing prep, or we've done all of these things to it, look how clever we are. We would talk to people, and if they were like, well, what does that mean, or they were like, well, how does this taste like this, we'd tell them. But it was never kind of like projected, but they were so
Mm.
curious about it, and consumers were really receptive. But funnily, in both the sustainability lectures and when White Lion launched, the trade reception was slightly different when we launched. Because I think, firstly, when we first started talking about sustainability, I think people saw it as a challenge to their foundations, their ways of
Mm.
working. And a lot of the lines that we got back was, well, we're a luxury industry. What are we doing talking about sustainability? And I was like, those two things are not at odds. Like, we can absolutely talk about those things in parallel to each other. And also, this isn't an attack on anything that we're doing as an industry. It's going, we as professionals should be looking at this in a wide set. And the same thing with White Lion. I think people saw it as kind of like a two fingers up to everybody else. And, they kind of saw it as a challenge to, those established models and ways of working. It was like, absolutely not. And even some of the conversations that kind of helped spur on White Lion were born out of being entrenched in that world, coming from a classic cocktail background, loving that side. I
Mhm.
remember having a conversation with Sasha Petrasky at White Star and talking about like, the way that, how much of a seismic shift he'd kind of ushered in with that kind of concentration on ice and citrus and the control of those ingredients. And he was like, but none of this was meant to then be a rule. It was
Mm.
meant to be able to highlight what we had grown up with and the problems that was inherent in those old systems. And so, it felt really kind of positive when I was telling him about what we were doing, and he was like, amazing. It's like, part of this is going, how do we as an industry push things forwards? Like, it wasn't about going, this is right or wrong.
Mm.
But I think a lot of people in the industry at first saw it as that. And it's really interesting now seeing, what Barney and Alex are doing with Devi in Paris. And, a lot of people have kind of asked me my thoughts on that. And it's like, I'm so excited. I love what they do. I think it's going to be incredible. But it was, when we closed White Lion, at first it was like ultra demonized, and then it became really celebrated. And as soon as people were like, oh no, this is delicious, and they're doing it out of honesty, and it's fun, and they could see it was done for kind of like an authentic passion for what we were trying to do. And I was really proud of everything that we had put out from that bar. We had such an incredible team. It was really fun to be in, and it went through this incredible arc. It went from being the most demonized bar in the world to being celebrated not only and it really was like some of the vitriol in those early days was amusing, and you know um, and I think that helped the amount of press that we ended up getting about it, because it was weird as hell, but people were also really pissed off about it. So it became this big talking point, and it quickly went through this change. And then when we closed, it was like, celebrated as this really important place, and it helped usher in ideas like sustainability or pre-batching, alternative acids, all of the stuff that was part of White Lion. And I was like, oh, it's amazing. It's nice to see it kind of like, the reason we closed it is it looked like it succeeded. We'd gone through this arc, we'd helped being part of this like period of change. But then I saw some of the conversations coming up around, Barney and Alex's bar launching with no ice, and people were being like, they don't know how to make cocktails, and what is this? Like a true cocktail is about having. And I was like, wow, we've gone real full circle there. So it was, yeah, it's been funny to see some of that change, and hopefully they kind of see a similar arc, and people like celebrate what they do rather than it being about whether it has ice or doesn't have ice. And yeah, I think it's still an important part of the conversation, because that control of ingredients. What do we actually get to? What do we want to display from our own choice of like being a bartender, looking after your own bar? What is it that you want to be able to kind of bring to life as your own kind of like slice of that? I hope there becomes like more room for there to be diversity in that space.
Yeah, it's always interesting. The industry gets in this sort of way as like, oh, such and such, and I'm sure you've had it through your career too. It's like, oh, such and like Dale DeGroff said this, and Gary Reagan said this, and Sash Petrovsky
Yeah.
said this. I'm like, Sash is the first person. I was at a conference with him years and years ago, and it was all about speakeasy and prohibition, and he was just like, speakeasy and prohibition was like bunk, right? I've made money off it, and I speakeasies, but it wasn't really a good era for
Yeah,
cocktails
yeah,
at
yeah.
all.
Absolutely.
And then Dal DeGroff goes and changes most of his recipes in his book when he re-releases it, because he's learned and he's evolved, and like
Absolutely.
it's this evolution that some people are just so far like just do not want to go into the evolution of what could be next.
Yeah, it's always funny when people, as you say, like nail it to the wall, as this kind of like particular like statement or quote from somebody, and that person goes, "Yeah, but things have evolved since then," and then they're like, "Wait a minute, all of these central tenets that I've held central to everything are now changed." And it's like, well, no, everything changes, and that's what we should celebrate. Like it's a it's part of what we want our industry to do is to evolve. And yes, it's great to have those foundations, and there are things that are timeless, but we don't make martinis the same way that we do when they were created, right? So like the whole point is to be able to keep reassessing things and shifting it as is appropriate. And that discussion point for our industry, I think, is really crucial. And it's amazing to see how much like the media covering cocktails, and the amount of conversation has grown, and yet some people won't engage in the conversations around it, which I think is that's really important for us to be able to like if we care about our industry, we need to be able to discuss it.
Yeah. So let's fast forward to last year when you opened up Silver Lion in DC. This is your first bar outside of London. How was that? How did that come about? And how was that a little bit? Was that daunting to do? Because like when you've got all your places in the UK, which you can catch a train and go to all of them in the day, then all
Yeah.
of a sudden you've got a spot in Washington DC in the US. How did it come about? And how has the change been?
Well, it was slightly different time, and actually, Amsterdam was our first international. So we
Mm,
opened Amsterdam before we opened Silver, and yeah, it then did it expanded the kind of remit in a very different way, because not only were we able to, as you say, just jump on a train between with each of the spots in London, it became a different dynamic of both location and like the culture that surrounded that, because we definitely wanted each of those bars to be about their location rather than just going, we've taken what we do in London and we've plugged it in somewhere else. Um, but even just like the time zones and being able to make sure that we can like be there for the teams and support and all that stuff, and it's been definitely a huge learning curve. And I think we approached it with a lot of honesty of going, we're excited by each of these places. So when we were opening in DC, we opened in DC because I went there and I fell in love with it. And, I got taken around. There was no intention of going, right, we're going to open a bar there. I was over doing a talk, chatting some whiskey things. And actually, it was Georgie Bell introduced me to a few friends. She'd been like, you're going to love DC. And I got taken around by people that were just so warm, and they like introduced me to things, saw stuff behind the scenes. And I was like, oh man, this is amazing. And they were like, you should open a bar here. It'd be class to be able to do things. And, all of the conversations snowballed in that way. And, that was a big part of particularly then making them work. We needed local partners. We needed to have people on the ground who understood it. And it meant that we could build up and channel the philosophy of what we've been doing in London, but adapt it for that market. So it's a bar for DC, born out of DC, celebrates DC, but it takes some of that Lime philosophy, it marries it with what is kind of part of that landscape, and it has a team that is from that city. So it's like we're able to kind of bring together really all the things that we love. It's like going, what is it that we can kind of create that creates excitement and creates a space for people to be able to kind of catch up and, shoot the shit with their friends. And so it was kind of like really nice to be able to explore a new space. And, we found totally new ingredients. We found different ways of working, different, a different culture around their cocktails. And, being able to kind of like splice what we do into that and kind of morph it into something new that kind of suited that city was so exciting for us. And, DC was very purposeful, like in the same way that Amsterdam is. It's not unforgiving on a time zone, so we can get on a call with the teams, and we're not like nobody's getting up at 5 a.m. actually, apart from Alex, who's in Mexico City now, and yeah, he's definitely doing some really early mornings of stuff. But we could feasibly do that, and honestly, if something really came up, we could be on a plane and we're there in like 6-7 hours, and it's really actually feasible to jump out there and do something quickly. So it was a balance of kind of excitement and practicality, and it was daunting doing something different. And the US is the birthplace of the cocktail, right? So we always knew we wanted to do something in the US, and we were so excited by being able to kind of work with an audience that knew cocktails better than probably any other market does, and to be able to go, cool, well, there exists these amazing stuff going on. DC's got such an incredible food and drink scene, and go, how can we have something that sits parallel to what's already there, but also hopefully offer something kind of different and something that city can be proud of, to kind of feel like it's got something unique and new coming to it.
So how do you approach that when you've got a team from DC? Obviously, there's a lot of remote work when it comes to cocktail creation and stuff. You're finding new ingredients, and it sort of pushes you out of your comfort zone. How do you approach that with the team to like build this backstory? And is that a layered effect that you sort of do when you're creating cocktails? Like, what's the history, the ingredients, and that sort of thing? How do you layer those things in so one, the team can digest it, but then also the consumer can digest it?
Yeah, and we worked really hard on that, and it's been, I suppose, that gave us a lot of confidence because we've been working on that process a lot for what we've been doing in London before we took it anywhere else. And it was really this idea of going, how do we shape a kind of macro narrative? So actually, we've got a new menu coming out in DC in a couple of weeks, and this was born out of the central premise of what the bar does. So DC is all about cultural exchange, and it was looking at the fact that as the capital city, you've got all of these amazing stories that flow in and out of it. It's kind of been the conduit and the kind of central point for so many different influences. And it's this idea about what happens when people embrace and share knowledge, and how things grow in a positive way through that. Like those are the stories that we've always tried to kind of seek out in DC. And as the menus have gone on, we've had different kind of like themes to what each of the kind of menus are focused on. So the last menu was on taboos, and it was going, what happens when you have this slightly, I suppose, a juxtaposition of like position in terms of, like outlook, and what happens when those two kind of like worlds collide, and you get this positive change that comes about through it. And often it's, like where people start to like shift perceptions or let go of prejudices is around what happens around taboos. So we'll kind of give them that as a title, and we'll just tell the team, like, whatever you're interested in, research this topic. and they can go and run far and wide. And the beauty of what we've always had in the Lion teams, I suppose, you join the company because you know you want to do something different. And that means that you're able to be yourselves, you're able to kind of come from any different background, and you can kind of join into the mix. But we're also then celebrating that diversity. So I know what I'm going to go research if I'm given a word or a topic like that. Whereas like the team members have come from so many different, not only geographical backgrounds, but they've come from different industries, different studies, different cultures, and they start to bring just these stories to the table, and we kind of bounce off each other, and we try and get to the heart of what's kind of like interesting around those stories, and then we'll start to use that to inform a particular technique, or it'll inspire us to think about a set of ingredients or a location, and we'll start to build the flavors out from there. So all of that can get done on paper. So we do all of that development prior to kind of touching flavors, and it's quite a lengthy process, and like we'll have a lot of back and forth. We'll do regular meetings. The teams will meet on the ground. They'll share and they'll chat. And then from there, we'll start to be able to kind of extrapolate it out. So it means that we can work on a lot of that stuff from afar. So it doesn't require us tasting things, because it's really still in that kind of research phase. And we'll start framing the hypothesis of going, okay, well, we want to talk about, I'm trying to give an example, and I always struggle to do this. I'm trying to think of one of them that's not on the new menu, because I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. Yeah, there's some very fun stories that they've come up with this new one. But I'm really we ended up mummifying this jackfruit, because we were hearing this story about, well, like a big taboo in the world is cannibalism, obviously, but it was like, obviously, but it was this point where, in Victorian England, where the Brits, good old British colonialism, they were going around the world, calling people savages and, saying that they were cannibals. And yet at the same time, the hypocrisy of going, they were actually eating mummies. Half the reason why there aren't more mummies in the world, because a lot of people were mummified. It wasn't just like, pharaohs and kind of like, the upper castes. It was a lot of people, and there's not more of them because the British upper class ate them, which is real weird. So we used that as a kind of inspiration for a technique, and so we looked at things that were often used as kind of flesh substitutes, which is jackfruit, and we took a lot of the same process of mummification, and we kind of applied it. And so the story informed the technique. We were able to then start to kind of extrapolate the flavors and kind of pull it out. So we were designing some of that hypothesis on paper, knowing some of the ways in which that might go. Sounds weird to say, but we'd had experience in mummification before, so we were kind of like trying to adapt that and think about where it might go in a flavor. And then between me, Alex, James, some of the other senior team, we can go in and like taste some of the mise en place, start chatting through the actual flavors and what does that mean to bring it to life before we can start kind of like honing it in on a drink. So it often is then we're spending a lot more time kind of intensively. I landed back from DC yesterday. Just being able to kind of go through some of those kind of flavors, understanding how they've transformed. What is it, given what we thought might happen, what is the flavor profile sitting at? Where do we want to start balancing it and developing the drink from there? Sorry, that was a long-winded way of talking about it, but hopefully it made sense.
I'm curious, just as a businessman as well, like how do you personally balance your schedule? And I feel like the answer is like I don't. You balance your work schedule, all your projects, your multiple venues, that sort of thing. How do you balance that out so that you still can have that compartment that is dedicated to um, inspiration and creativity and stuff like that, when you might be stressing about a P&L from
Sure.
one of your other venues? How do you balance that all out on a personal level?
I think it's putting structures around it, and I'm very, very fortunate that all of the teams are brilliant and they've got it all under control. Honestly, like I don't need to worry. If I could, I don't want to. I'm basically trying to. It makes it sound like I'm saying I'm useless in the mix, which might be the case. I might just be doing it because I really enjoy being there for each of these things. But we put so much emphasis on going. We can be more creative if we put structures around it.
Hmm.
And the more that we can be able to kind of like line up these things, the more that we can just focus in our attention to problem solve, to think outside the box, think laterally in each of those spaces. And again, I feel like endlessly thankful for having teams that are really good at organizing all of those different bits and being able to kind of juggle me into those different kind of pockets, because there are a lot of projects that we have on at the moment. And I think it's helped by the fact that I really enjoy the runaround. Like, I love being able to jump into each of these different kind of spaces. And I would be doing this if God, man, it'd be terrible if I had money. I'd be so self-destructive if I had any. But like, it's never been about money for me. And like, if I won the lottery, I would be doing exactly what I'm doing now. And I
Just with
love
a
this
Porsche
world.
or a Ferrari.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I'd be getting there a lot quicker.
Yeah.
But it would be, yeah, it would very much be the same kind of process of going, how do we kind of keep all these plates spinning, and like have that enjoyment of going, get to wear different creative hats by jumping into each of the different spaces, and we get to kind of explore all the things we love through these different, all of them have their own lens, be it the TV stuff, the venues, the studio projects. They all kind of take on the same tasks in their own kind of particular manner. So yeah, I think I don't have a good answer for how we kind of juggle it, because it is busy, and I kind of still, I still work 7 days a week for stuff. So there's still very much that kind of runaround side, but it's also enabled by, the team being so kind of like tight on all of their projects, the way that they work, how much they own and understand each of their own spaces. So then I feel very grateful that I just get to kind of like duck in and kind of like be able to kind of add to the conversation, help support, help direct them to, maybe somebody who can kind of like act as a bit of inspiration, or give them insight to something they're working on, or connect them with somebody who can kind of help unlock something new for them. So it's a really lovely position of being able to go, well, there's these wonderful creative structures in place, and I get to jump in amongst them.
So talking about spinning plates, talk us through Taste Trips, your new TV show.
I mean, this was a real labor of love. Like, it was a beast to get together, and we've learned so much in quite a short space of time. But the actual concept for it has been a long time in the brewing, and we very much knew that we were like, well, there's such incredible stories in our industry. Every time I send a friend who's not part of our world, either if they're going, oh, everybody messages me and they're going, I'm gonna, Lisbon or Sydney or wherever it
Mm.
might be. Do you have a list of places? And sometimes I have visited, and I've got like, spots that I've kind of like been able to duck into, and some of them are like, wonderful cocktail bars, some of it's like local taverns, whatever it might be. It's a mix of stuff. Or it's people I know who are doing rad things in the place, and you're like, go see this person, go up to this bar and chat behind, and kind of ask them. And I remember it was something, Ueno-san, who was an amazing mentor to me as a young bartender, used to say, like, bartenders are the concierges of the city. And if you want to know what's going on, if you want to know not just food and drink things, but like what's happening in a gallery, or where like the exciting area of town might be, the bartenders are the ones to talk to, because they cover the full gamut of it, rather than if you're in a nice restaurant, they're going to recommend a couple of things that feel very much in their vein of things, whereas bartenders will cover the whole range. And so it was trying to take that kind of insight of going, we have food and drink as this wonderful world into a culture. It's the way to be able to kind of quickly get to grips with a sense of place. It's the way to be able to kind of meet wonderful people and enjoy delicious things. But they're also fascinating human stories that connect to, the geographies and the histories. And if friends who aren't even interested in whiskey have, end up like touring a distillery in Scotland, and they meet the people who make it, they fall in love, and they're going, this is incredible, and I never knew whiskey could be like this. I just thought it was XYZ. And you see that on everything. It doesn't matter if it's a rum distillery, if it's a a brewery, if it's a winery, if it's a bodega. It's like everything has this kind of amazing sense of channeling all of these wonderful human stories through products that have been born out of these histories. And the whole show was really going, how do we shine a light on that? How do we do it for the people who don't aren't so fortunate to be able to travel around the world and see these things? Like by being able to kind of watch it, you make the world feel smaller and closer, and you see all of these things that you're like, oh, that seemed weird to me before, but actually that's just these people's cheese or these people's like way of like
When we start
preserving.
talking about ice, like,
Yeah.
like
Oh, yeah. That I'm so glad that became such a. It's just wonderful to hear him speak about things like that. And it is those bits, and it's like little bits of social currency that we know that our industry has, where you're like that little tidbit of a fact that's kind of like wonderful to share, or it's just that little bit that you can include in your everyday life, but it just kind of like makes all of those places seem really accessible through food and drink. And so we wanted to do it for so many years. We've been talking about it. It was originally part of the book series when we pitched it. We spoke to different TV channels, and it was so hard to convince people to go, this is about booze, but it's not about boozing.
mm,
And they were so
so
reluctant.
tough,
It's so tough.
so
And
tough.
yeah, to then finally be able to kind of have partners who believed in it. And as I say, we're still learning. Like there's heaps that we need to still develop, and there's bits of it that yeah, still a very, very tough, but it's still an amazing. It feels so. I feel so fortunate to be able to do it, but it also feels like a responsibility we have to go. Look, this is why our industry should be valued alongside
Hmm.
other great cultural expressions, alongside food. It needs to get recognized in the way that you'll have that from like restaurateurs getting nods from government cultural kind of like exhibitions, and nobody is touching booze with that, even though it's like crucial to economies, it's crucial to like people's livelihoods for generations, and magical products that are really born out of kind of like incredible history and perseverance. So yeah, I feel really proud to be able to start telling some of those stories and connect people to it. And it's been bonkers to me to see, I find all of those data points kind of surreal. When you see the kind of like number of people that viewed something, it just seems like crazy to me. Like I remember even when we were doing the masterclass series, and you
Mm.
see the number of people that take this class, and you're like, I can't fathom that. Like we were just like doing stuff in our kitchen, and we cared about these stories, and now there's like I don't know that there was something like I think the first episode was like 293 million views, and I was like, that's a number I can't fathom anyway. But the fact that people have cared about that and have engaged in it, and have watched all these wonderful stories, and hopefully have gone whatever it might be, Japanese whiskey, single malts from Scotch, and the pending ones that I'm really excited to be able to kind of start to hear come out. If it's made people go, oh well, you know what, I didn't really know that about that product, or I'm going to seek that out because that sounds really wonderful, or that person, their story is amazing, and I just want to be able to understand a bit more of it. Like it feels such an incredible thing to be able to do. So I'm like, yeah, I'm really, really proud of what it's been as a project, and so many people have worked so hard to make that a reality. Because they really, we were swimming upstream with that. Like we were fighting against so much stuff to make it happen. To then see it kind of live in the world, and obviously we'll still be critical about it, and there's more that we want to be able to do, but to see people enjoy it is kind of really quite magical.
Was there a time during the filming that you were just like, because we've been around, both of us have been around long enough that we've had a lot of amazing experiences.
Yeah.
Was there a time during the filming that you were just like, damn, I'm standing here in this moment of time, in this place, and this has absolutely just taken my breath away?
Honestly, dude, like every single moment of it. And like it's not my first rodeo with this stuff, and as you
Mhm.
say, but like, and it's not that we were getting some of it. We were, like to be able to go around the Yamazaki warehouses with Shinji-san, or to be able to like pull stuff from casks, or again, I'm trying to work out what I'm allowed to say. There's some bits that yes, they were like that we got a special insight into something, but it was more just being able to be there in that place, and to know that we're trying to tell that story, and it's with the people who make it, or from that culture, or and again, it's all the things that are adjacent to that as well. It's not just the people making the booze. It's like restaurants, it's music stuff, it's fashion, it's like where do all of these things interact with these like products. And so like some of it you're just like, this is truly magical. Like being able to be in like a flamenco bar, or to be in a Kaylee, or to be like, just like a little restaurant, or to be talking about somebody's music. And, you to know that that's like, you're giving, you're giving voice to those things is it feels really special. So like every time we were going through somewhere and you're chatting with somebody, I'm like, you get goosebumps because you're just like, this is so cool. And, we're getting to kind of highlight this, and everybody's got a fascinating story. Because honestly, everybody we met, everywhere we've been, like it blows you away. Like some of them have just been very personal. Like Scotland still remains home to me. I've loved kind of being able to visit Japan all the time. And so there's always that kind of like little bit of personal connection. But there's a sense of wonder everywhere we've been. And each time we've spoken with somebody, you just you learn something new, and it shifts your perception of something. And it just feels like, you know I feel really fortunate to be in those kind of circumstances, but then also to go, we get to capture this, we're recording it, it's a document of these brilliant people, of all of the things that they've been through, and they're channeling, centuries worth of history as part of that as well. So it's like there is like endless bits for us to explore, but there has been so many of those moments. Like every single part of it has felt that special.
Do you think in this day and age, with the everybody having a supercomputer in their pocket and being able to Google everything, do you think there's a certain level, especially with the younger generation of bartenders, that you kind of have to push them out the tree like a baby bird and go, you need to go travel, you need to go experience these things yourself. You can't just watch your show or like Google something and you're going to understand Wayno-san's way of doing things.
Yeah,
Do you think that it's a necessary thing to sort of push younger bartenders to get out there and experience these things?
I think, listen, we're very fortunate as an industry that we do get to kind of travel in that way, and I think it's immeasurably valuable. But I think it is a luxury as well. It's not that everybody needs to travel, and I think one of the things that we learned when we were doing this show, and one of the reasons why we were really keen to actually put it on YouTube alongside the channel in the US, was going to markets where people don't get to travel very much, and going, well, hopefully this can give you like a little bit of an insight into some other things that are going on, and it's free and you can kind of consume it. But it's more the idea of going, you should learn from everywhere. Like everything and anything could be an inspiration. And that's kind of, to me, the push the baby bartender out the tree thing is, you often kind of end up like a little bracketed about where you learn things. And we all do this, right? We all have our
Mhm.
echo chambers, we all have the things that we feel comfortable in. But it's the moment of going, oh damn, I could like learn. I always say this in terms of like people to be inspired by. Like the world's best janitor is as inspiring as the world's best sommelier to us. Like it doesn't matter about what the medium is. Like anybody who's at the top of their game should be somebody we should be listening to. And on the kind of, not the flip side, but like a parallel point to it, is going like little bits. The more you focus on the details, like little bits of attention that you can pay to stuff, the more it'll become as an inspiration to you. And I think you're right. In the age of like supercomputers in our pockets, like we're often rushing stuff, and we're looking to kind of the pace in which we need to consume, or we need to kind of like be able to look at things. We're often looking at the result. We're not looking at all the little kind of tangential bits that lead up to that. And that's what I mean about paying attention to those details, because those are the bits that often spark the inspiration. It's like, that classic thing. It's annoying when you kind of like leave school and you're like, oh, you're right. The working is more important than the answer. And you're like, you go through all the bits and you're like, well, I got the answer right. Why do I need to show all this working? And it's that like, and it's like, it took me years to be able to kind of like realize those are the most kind of important bits. And, that's definitely a lesson I wish I'd been kind of like taught as a youngster. Actually, I mean, I my teachers at school definitely tried to teach me this, so it's my own fault for missing that point. But yeah, I think that's a really crucial thing to kind of encourage people to do, is go, yes, absolutely. If you can travel, it's such a clear way of, again, making the world feel smaller, and like making those things that feel different suddenly feel very like approachable. And yeah, you kind of shift your mindset in an amazing way. But you can do it even without having to kind of travel. Um, if you don't have the means to do so, by just kind of focusing on all of the attention and details that surround you currently, and again, learn from different sets of people. That's really, really important as well.
Well, speaking of that, like how you've worked with a whole bunch of different creatives in different mediums, not just in the hospitality industry, but outside the hospitality industry. How do you get them all on the same page to go the same direction, to sort of go into these uncharted territories that you like to sort of like delve into when you're talking to a young bartender who might be super passionate, or older bartender who might be a little grizzly, but then you're also talking to creative people outside of our industry sphere. How
Yeah.
do you, on a personal level, like get them together and like put them on the same path?
I think it's a really crucial point. You're right. Like, whenever you're working with different sets of people, or you're trying to bring together a wide set, like the classic idiom of, like, too many cooks, right? Like, I think the difference can be, if you can frame the problem in a way that everybody's on the same page, then you can direct everybody's problem solving at the same kind of like topic. And I think I'm going to answer it in a little circuitous way. Shock horror. I tend to talk too much. Sorry, but it's like, I think the big thing that we often say to the teams is, like, don't ask people to do your homework. So if you can kind of get to the heart of what you're actually asking. So, I had like a lot of people that would message us in the early days of kind of White Lion, and they'd be like, how do I replace a lime in this cocktail? And I
Mm,
was like, hey, if you really just want to substitute this, we've written loads of articles online. If you just Google it, you'll find this. Like, and so, like, you're asking me to do your homework of just, shall I type this into Google? But also, it's kind of asking the wrong question. If you had kind of gone, oh, I want to hit a different profile of this drink. I don't want it to be the plumpness of this. I don't know. I'm just going to make something up. Citrus profile. I want something a bit more clean and austere, or I want something that presents a different profile of acidity on the palate. Then, like, we're on the same page to have a discussion, and I can present things, or I can ask you questions, you can pitch questions back, and we can end up walking along the same path to kind of reach something new. And so we do a lot of the same things, where we'll, be it kind of like working with people who are like food adjacent, like Ariel Johnson or Dr. John, both doctors and kind of a brilliant flavor wizards who've been kind of huge parts of the Lion kind of like journey from the early days. Actually, Ariel from before the early days of Lion. Um, we will often have like read some of their work. We will have done some research. We then will kind of go with a question, and it'll be something particular that we can kind of go, well, we know this happens, but we're intrigued by this. What would this mean? And it's hopefully something new for them to be asked as well. Like,
mm,
it's getting them to be kind of like thinking on, okay, I've worked in this application, I've seen it work, I know what happens here, I know the science behind it. So when you're asking me about this whole new set of conditions, I can kind of like try and hypothesize about what might happen, but then we can have a discussion and we can go, well, why? What are we trying to do? Could there be a different route? And that's worked really well when we're working with very different industries. When we worked with a material scientist, if we had just gone, this is what we're trying to do, like, we're kind of using them, and it's not really a discussion, and we're not
mm,
aiming at something. Whereas when we're kind of like approaching it with a problem and a mutual curiosity, and this kind of, we're framing it that we're on the same page, then we're both kind of discovering something new, and we're able to kind of like walk down that path together. And I think not only does that end up being much more respectful of people's time, I think it ends up creating something that's like vastly different, because
mm,
they, like, this is where, it's the heart of a lot of the things that we do in the company, but I suppose it's very central to the current Lioness project on, that's that the new series that Lioness are working on, having part of the cookbooks. It's on this kind of collaboration series. And it's this idea of going, on one side, you have what we would do, on the other, you have this kind of other expertise. And each of us would go down different paths, whereas that middle ground of what we get when we get to collaborate in a true sense, rather than just kind of like taking some of their information and putting it into our stream, we're creating something wholly new. Like, there isn't something that has happened in that way before, because we're blurring two worlds. And that to me is some of the most exciting space, but it only works if you're able to be on the same page by framing the problem that you're trying to create together, rather than just one party. And it's bilateral, right? Like, this, like, there's been parts where people have asked us for information without us actually ending up doing kind of a solid collaboration out of it. But I think the parts where you get to kind of cross over in the way, that's where it enters into really exciting new territory.
Wow. So it is basically, actually, the date is pretty much, we're at the middle of the year. What's the next 6 months hold for Mr. Lyan?
We've got a lot coming up. I remember there was one point where we were starting to map out the year earlier. I was like, have we booked the year already? This is terrifying. As somebody who's not a hugely organized person, I was like, oh God, this is going to be like a nightmare to try and juggle everything that I know is going to come up last minute in amongst it. But the next big one for the venues is we have birthday celebration for Silverline, and we're launching a new menu. That's going to be a double whammy coming up next month. And both those things have been a long time in the works. So I'm really excited to be able to both launch the menu, because I think what the team are doing, actually, it's across the board. All the teams are, post COVID, post kind of getting things resettled, like reframing things. They're just flying, and the output that they're doing, I'm like, I walk into the creative sessions and I'm like, this is super inspiring. I'm like just blown away by what's going on. So I'm really excited to see kind of they're really hitting stride with their menus at the moment. So I think this menu is going to be very special, and I think people need a party at the moment. So I'm excited by the idea of going, you know what? Things are pretty like crazy and grim around the world right now. So like, let's have something that celebrates togetherness. And it's not the idea of just going, we'll put blinkers on and just like hide from what's happening in the world. It's the idea of going, in a time where division is being sown everywhere, actually getting together with people that inspire us and, celebrate each other and kind of like toast and break bread. That's a really important thing to be able to do. So I'm really excited to be able to do that. We will have the next bits of taste strips coming up, because some of it was, it's a natural product that we're focusing on. It's contingent on like certain things and timing of the world. So I'm really excited that we're like getting out to, kind of like focus on kind of some of these
You're gonna let
other
it.
stories.
We're not gonna talk about taste trips anymore, because you're gonna let
No,
something. You're gonna let
I
something
100%
slip.
am. I'm gonna
I
get in
can.
trouble.
I can see it in your brain every time you start talking about it. You're just like, and we went to here, and we did this.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we
Yeah, I have a habit of like, talking about, I just get excited by the things in the project, and the team are like, we're not meant to say what that is. I'm like, God damn it. And there is something secret that we'll be launching, that we'll be talking about soon as well. There's there's a couple of new bits that will be kind of coming online across the company. So there's really quite a lot that's still to kind of come in the year. And I'm really excited for those, because it just feels like, we were firefighting for the last few years, right? Like, and it's been really tough in the UK, you know both with post COVID of stuff, but like Brexit's really kind of hit hard here, and like the landscape is super tough, and the government support is just
non-existent.
non-existent, absolutely. And so it's kind of going, how do we kind of like keep things kind of like spinning? And then having done that for a while, and again, feeling very fortunate that we've been able to kind of build momentum, to then go, actually, let's start pushing and like really doubling down on the stuff that excites us. Feels really, really exciting to be able to do. So yeah, across the company at the moment, it feels like this year is going to be a big year for a lot of different things. We've got a couple of collaboration projects, like products coming to life. We launched the Three Families as like a cocktail seasoning with some kind of like Sri Lankan kind of family companies, which was, again, that felt really exciting to look at, because it was a different set of learning for us. It was moving into a different space. And I think what we've been able to create feels really purposeful and, actually like useful out of it, which is always kind of like a really nice thing to be able to kind of like reflect on when we've got something live. But there's a couple of bits like that we're also kind of like working on at the moment to kind of bring to life. And not just with taste strips, I've been able to travel and get out to some of the bar shows or see people at different events, and I've missed that as well. Like there's a there's a load of openings that have been happening around the world. I also haven't been in London at all, so I'm kind of there's a load of exciting openings that have happened here that I need to also get round to. But yeah, it feels despite everything, I feel really optimistic and I feel really excited to be able to kind of run around all of these new things that we have coming up.
Yeah, when you're talking about Brexit and COVID, like I sometimes think that just because it's not in the media vernacular
Yeah,
anymore doesn't mean that like it's not going to hit. And I even pandemic, we talk about post pandemic, and it was like, well, that was a couple of years ago. I'm like, yeah, but it wasn't that long ago, like, that we
yeah,
were like, had no bars at no stools at the bar, and, like, masks and perspex and all
hundred
these and
percent.
plexiglass. Like, it's not that long ago, and those things take time to drew it's a long tail, like, a long tail fuckover that's gonna happen later on.
100%. Couldn't agree more. And like I think we're really only starting to see the kind of consequences of that properly now.
Mhm,
And like this is the point of processing it. And that's why, the kind of the way that costs have risen, the way that like, we struggle to get hold of things, the restrictions of movements for people and all that stuff. Like it's very apparent. And we will only get through those things by discussing them as an industry and making
mhm,
sure that we're able to kind of like challenge and kind of like defend the bits that we know are really important, because the last thing anyone wants to see is kind of like people losing more public spaces in a time where we need to you know be more social, be more out with each other. So it's kind of like I feel like there's a real need to kind of like have those discussions at the moment. But as I say, like I do feel optimistic about them. There's definitely a lot of work to do, but I also know that everybody's kind of like, no, we don't want to lose these spaces. We like,
mhm,
and even speaking with some council people in across the world, like hearing about the fact that like, listen, you don't want to see everything become really generic in your city spaces. Like nobody wants to have that all kind of gutted out from within the kind of cultural landscape. So now's the time to really focus on it, and everybody's feeling that kind of fire in their belly about it. So I'm hopeful we're able to yeah start talking in a mature way about our industry and defend it at the table that needs to be like be included in those discussions.
mm. Okay, so we're at the stage of the, podcast where I always do 5 deep podcast questions for every
Okay.
guest. So, what is one lesson or experience that has shaped your perspective the most, and how do you carry that forward in your life?
Um, I think like I anybody who's creative has this kind of like fear of failure, and that can often be something that kind of stops people either pushing for that like extra yard or getting started. Actually, it can often feel like a real big barrier to stuff. And there's been several moments of failure, and like really too many to list. And it's not even about specific examples. It was just like fear is like a useful driver. I've always talked about the fact that it's really important to be shit scared of where you're going. Like that's a good sign. But instead of fear of failure, it's fear and failure. And like learning of the fact of
Mm,
going, the fear is important, failing is important. Like it's where like it's often talked about how like that teaches you quicker, but it's so true. And I think particularly for creative worlds, embracing fear and failure is something that we need to like talk about, because sometimes it's stigmatized, sometimes people like hide it, it can feel really diminishing, it can feel like you're crushed by things. Whereas the more that we can go, no, this is like crucial, embrace it, see it as part of the like necessary journey, and talk about it more.
I just want a Mr. Lyan motivational poster now of you as a kitten hanging off a line underneath it says fear and failure.
The cat stuff features in most of our things, so it's like it'll probably end up as one of the memes at some stage.
If you could leave one lasting message or piece of wisdom for the world, what would it be and why?
um I used to joke with like my old flatmate from Edinburgh, and I was like, we used to say to each other quite a lot. It was like, and it was definitely a joke, and it was a bit of a like Simpsons reference, but it's like measure twice, cut once. But I was like, it's exactly that. It's like that's what the world needs to do more of. Is like just that moment of reflection and like being able to take measure of things before you kind of commit. And like there is no part of the world that wouldn't be better with like more education around it. So like the more you take measure, just do that like sense check of it. And yes, that needs to be wide in its thinking. It's not just kind of like, this is my perspective, I'm going to look at this. I mean, measure it in a really wide sense, but like take that in before we kind of commit to stuff. Like I think, yeah, the world would be a lot less angry a place if people just started to kind of like use that as a metric.
Looking back on your journey, what is something you wish you had understood earlier in life?
Um, I think I wish I had learned to kind of ask for help more, and I think it's it's something that um, again, I think is it's quite like hard. People don't like doing it because they think it's imposing on people. And actually, I think the thing that I realized is like really and I mean this is like I really see this as like a fundamental of being human. Is like people want to help. Like, and it's so wide in that, like, and it's just again, you're not asking people to do your homework. You're not asking you to do it for them, but being able to ask for help is like it's like it's a superpower. And as soon as you kind of like realize it, and like of course all of these things like in response to things like trauma, it's really important, like that we're not, if we internalize and try and like do it ourselves, that's where things get really problematic. But it's just in a general sense, like even when things haven't like hit the fan, like being able to kind of ask for help with it is like just it's incredible how much people want to be able to help. And it's strangers, it's friends, it's family, it's everybody around. Like there is so much there that can be a support for people.
How do you define success, and has your definition of it changed over time?
I thought about this recently actually because we were chatting about partly when we kind of hit decade and some of the conversations past that about going, what do we want to do next? And I think success to me is freedom. And I mean freedom in a sense of going, you know where do we what do we want to be able to kind of focus on, and what are the bits that we want to be able to do, rather than being kind of boundaried or having to do things in a particular way because of XYZ. Like I'm very thankful that we've been quite like fierce of like being able to hold on to kind of control and do things that we believe in. And that freedom is something I am very thankful for. Like it means that like if we fuck up, it's our fault. But like that's also a good freedom to be able to have. But yeah, I think that is something. I don't know if it's changed over the years. As I say, like it's success to me has never been about like accolades. It's certainly not been about like money or fame or anything like that. It's been about going, how do we get to kind of like make a difference and focus on the things that we care about. And that's what like freedom allows you. So like I think it's just become clearer to me as the years have gone
Nice. What do you hope your legacy will be, and what steps are you taking to build it?
on. The central part of Lion has always been about people. And it's partly going, how do we like look at that industry wise, how do we care about it as a collection of people, how do we look after our guests as like a primary focus. But it's also been our team. And I got together with like some of our seniors at the beginning of the year, and we talked about the stuff that we were like you know proud of, that had kind of been part of the journey. And like to me, it always been the people part of it. Like our team is something that I feel like, and I feel weird. I always think it's slightly odd to say you're proud of other people's kind of like success because it's theirs. But I think just looking at all the things that have been part of that collective of people, and not only is it the ones who are part of the team now, it's the fact that it's been a platform for all the people who've gone on to do other brilliant things around the world. And if I look at that like family tree or where it spiders off to, I'm like, God damn, it's been like a brilliant collection of people. And I think the thing that we've always wanted Lion to be was a stepping stone to be able to create positive change, good things. That was like the foundational statement, is going, how do we do good? And if we can do that through people, then that would be the most amazing, like whatever echo of what the company could have become. Like that to me would be the most important part of it.
Wow. What's your favorite classic cocktail?
My favorite classic is a martini, and it's changed over the years. At one point, it would have been Manhattan, and then probably a daiquiri. But I think it was just this point where I started to honestly, it was just like making people martinis outside the bar. Strangely enough, like it was because when people come into a bar and they order a martini, we've had lots of different martini variants on the menus, and people often know how they want their martini. Whereas when you're doing it at home, there's just this like real intimacy to it as a thing, and I think both in the profile of it and the number of varieties you can have, and like you switch up a brand and it takes on its own like little statement of what a martini is. I think it's like perfect, and it's yeah, like it's changed for me in that kind of like mindset, because I always like respected what there was as a martini, but it was never this like, yeah, it was like one of the key tenets of like the cocktail world, but it's taken on this like whole different tier to me as a drink, as time's gone on, and then I've seen people's reactions to it, and I it's like this is like an often repeated quote to me from me where I'm like, it's one of life's perfect moments, but I've just had so many of those, and it's like with different people, and be it a partner, be it a friend, family, and you have that martini and you just get to catch up over it, and you're like, this is what life is about. So like, these little moments of just being able to hang out with somebody you love, and like you have it, you're about to have dinner, it's just like a pause, and it just like removes agenda, it stops it being work chat, it just like flows into this like wonderful kind of like middle ground of things that's just a perfect moment. And I'm like, this nothing can touch the martini, because it gets to like own that in such a wonderful way.
Well, that was an emotional description of a martini if I've ever heard one. That was amazing. Ryan, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it. We've been trying to plan this since like March.
I know.
I
I'm
think.
sorry.
And oh no, dude, like it was crazy. And then they were like, do you want to do it while he's in Vancouver for 50 best? And I was like, no.
This is gonna be chaos.
It was absolute, like, because we hosted so much, we like hosting is as exhausting as doing the events as well. Like
Sure.
every day people show up at 12 o'clock when you're not open, and they're getting dumpling shop slushies. But I just want to say thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. And it was the perfect episode to segue me back into being more schedule focused and getting these done every single week.
Love it. Oh, it's been such a joy to chat. Hopefully it's not run on too long.
No, it's perfect. And just so everybody can listen, I'm going to put the link in the description of the podcast as well. Taste Trips is on YouTube for everybody outside the UK. Can watch it on Amazon, no problems at all.
Yeah. It's all online. It's on Reach TV in the US, or you can, all the links are through. If you go onto Mr Lyan, there's links to Mr Lyan's Taste Trips, the YouTube channel, and then obviously all the bars and the studio projects as well.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks so much,
man.
brother.
Cheers. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening, Pose Shifters. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really enjoy sitting down with friends and peers and just chatting about the industry and getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on out there. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, everything on all the platforms. Just hit it up and I'll do my best to answer any queries or questions you have. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.